My name is Claire Whitmore. I am 28 years old, and 13 years ago, my father looked me in the eye and told me to get out. It was a stormy October night. I was 15, soaking wet, shaking on the porch, with no plan, no money, and nowhere safe to go. The reason I was thrown out was not truth. It was a lie told by my younger sister, carefully planned, coldly delivered, and believed. My parents never questioned it. They did not ask for proof, did not hear me out, and did not pause before erasing me from that home. 3 hours later, the police called them to the hospital after I had been hit by a car in the middle of that violent storm. When my father entered the hospital room, his hands would not stop shaking because he saw who was sitting beside my bed. That woman was Dr. Vivian Hart, one of the most respected professors in the state, and the person who had saved my life. She found me on the road, broken and bleeding. And from that night forward, everything in my life began to change completely. Last month, I stood on stage at my sister's graduation as the keynote speaker, and my parents had no idea I was coming. Before I tell you what happened when they saw me, please like and subscribe only if this story truly speaks to you. I would also love to know where you are watching from and what time it is there, so leave a comment and tell me below. Now let me take you back to where it all started, because none of that graduation moment makes sense without the storm. I learned early that in our house, Sophie Whitmore's tears always made more noise than anything I ever achieved. When I was 11, I won first place at the regional science fair with a water filtration project that beat 40 other students. I was thrilled. I ran all the way home with the blue ribbon in my hand, my heart racing, proud of what I had built alone. I burst through the front door and found my mother, Helen Whitmore, in the kitchen, and I shouted that I had won. Helen Whitmore smiled, hugged me, and told me that was wonderful. And for one tiny second, I felt truly seen. Then Sophie Whitmore walked in from dance practice, 8 years old, cheeks red, crying because she had messed up a turn. My mother's arms left me immediately. She knelt beside Sophie Whitmore and whispered comfort while I still held my ribbon. Nobody asked to see the project. Nobody asked how I won. Nobody even looked twice at the blue ribbon in my hand. That became the pattern in our house. Sophie Whitmore needed more attention, more softness, and more patience than I did. Everyone said she was sensitive. Everyone said she needed careful handling. I learned to celebrate quietly and need less. I learned to be smaller, calmer, easier, because every sign of my own need felt like a burden no one wanted to hold. By 14, I had stopped showing my report cards at home, because straight A's never mattered besides Sophie Whitmore's dramas. When I earned a full scholarship to a prestigious summer science camp, I was happier than I had been in months. It was 2 weeks studying environmental science with real researchers, and I could already imagine my future opening. My father, Daniel Whitmore, barely looked up from his phone before saying, "That's nice, Claire Whitmore." Then Sophie Whitmore burst into tears and demanded to know why I got to leave while she had to stay home. Helen Whitmore put a hand on her shoulder and told me maybe I could skip the camp this year for family unity. Sophie Whitmore said she needed me there, and somehow that became a reason for me to lose something I had earned. I did not go to that camp. My parents called it understanding, sacrifice, and being the bigger person in the family. What it really taught me was silence. I became quiet, undemanding, and practiced taking up as little room as possible. The breaking point was already coming toward us, but I had no idea it would arrive in the middle of a storm. At first, the lies were small. Sophie Whitmore borrowed my things without asking, and denied it even when caught. I would mention it gently, because that was the only safe way to speak in our house. But it never mattered anyway. One day, $50 went missing from Helen Whitmore's wallet, and suddenly all eyes in the house turned to me. Sophie Whitmore claimed she had seen me near our mother's purse that morning, though I had left early for school. Daniel Whitmore called me into his study and asked if I had taken the money from my mother's wallet. I said no immediately. I told him I had not touched it, and that Sophie Whitmore was lying about what she saw. His jaw tightened the moment I accused her. He told me not to blame my sister and cut me off before I finished. I lost my phone for a month, and the science camp my parents had promised for the following summer vanished too. My mother said they could not trust me with independence right now, as if a lie had become a proven fact. Sophie Whitmore watched from the stairs, and when our parents turned away, she smiled at me like she had won. That stolen $50 was just a test run. She was learning how much damage tears could do when aimed carefully. After that, everything escalated. A broken vase was my fault before anyone even asked what had happened to it. A failed test. Sophie Whitmore never studied for somehow became my responsibility because I had not helped enough. A rumor at school about her cheating on a quiz was blamed on me too, even though I had said nothing at all. Every single time, her tears outweighed my truth. Every single time, my parents chose the easier story over reality. I stopped defending myself because defense only sounded like disrespect to them, and innocence changed nothing. By 15, I felt like a ghost in my own house, visible only when someone needed a person to blame for something. I started spending more time at school, at the library, or anywhere that was not home, because home no longer felt safe. I told myself I only had to survive 2 more years until college, and then I could finally build another life. I was wrong. The storm arrived before graduation, before escape, and before I had the power to leave on my own terms. There was a boy in my AP chemistry class named Ethan Walker, and he was kind, awkward, and bad at equations. He asked me for help balancing reactions, and I stayed after class a few times to explain stoichiometry to him. That was all it was: homework help, extra minutes after class, and one student helping another student catch up. But Sophie Whitmore had a massive crush on Ethan Walker, the sort that turns simple things into emergencies. She walked past my classroom just to see him, and once I saw his last name scribbled beside hers in her diary. On a Tuesday, Ethan Walker stopped me at my locker and thanked me for helping him study the day before. He asked if we could study together again for the midterm, and I said yes, because to me it was harmless. When I turned, I saw Sophie Whitmore at the end of the hall, staring at us with a pale, rigid expression. That night at dinner, she barely spoke. She just moved food around her plate while our mother kept asking what was wrong. I should have known her silence was more dangerous than her crying, because silence meant she was planning something. That same week, a visiting lecturer came to my biology class, Dr. Vivian Hart from the State University. She was speaking about educational equity research, and every word she said lit something alive inside me again. I stayed after class to ask questions, and she listened seriously, not like adults usually did when I spoke. She looked impressed. She told me I had a curious mind and handed me her card before she left the room. "Don't let anyone dim that light," Dr. Vivian Hart said, and I smiled without knowing she would save my life. A week later, on Friday, storm warnings began flashing across phones and television screens all over our town. Everyone was preparing for a major system, buying supplies, checking generators, closing windows, and rushing home early. Sophie Whitmore still would not speak to me. She would not even look at me, and I felt uneasy all day. I remember thinking at least the weekend would be quiet enough for homework, and I had no idea what she had planned. Rain started around 6 in the evening, and we ate dinner while the weather alert kept buzzing on my father's phone. Wind advisories, flood warnings, thunder rolling closer. Everyone in the house was tense, but no one said much. After dinner, I went upstairs to do English homework while rain hammered against the windows like thrown gravel. It was the kind of storm that makes you feel grateful to be indoors, wrapped in walls, lights, and dry clothes. Around 8, I heard crying downstairs, loud, choking sobs from Sophie Whitmore, and I froze at my desk. My mother's voice turned soft and urgent. She asked what was wrong, what happened, and who had hurt her. Then my father shouted my name from below, sharp and angry, and my stomach dropped before my feet even moved. I walked downstairs slowly, every step heavy, already feeling that something terrible had begun without me there. Sophie Whitmore sat on the couch, with her face buried in Helen Whitmore's shoulder, while my father stood furious. I asked what was going on. Sophie Whitmore looked at me through tears, and for 1 second, I saw coldness there. My father told her to repeat what she had told them, and his voice sounded like ice cracking across a lake. She asked why I hated her so much, and I felt the room tilt because I had no idea what she meant. Then she accused me of spreading rumors at school. About her, about Ethan Walker, about cheating, and about lies. I said I had never done any of that. My voice shook because I could already feel my parents choosing her. Sophie Whitmore pulled out her phone and showed our parents messages from an account with my name and picture on it. I stared at the screen. The profile looked like mine, but I had not written a single one of those messages. I said someone must have used my account or faked it, but my father cut me off before I could explain. He told me to stop lying. He said every word like a verdict, as if truth had already been decided without me. Then Sophie Whitmore whispered that I knew she liked Ethan Walker, but I flirted with him anyway to hurt her. I said Ethan Walker only asked me for chemistry help, and that we were just study partners, nothing more. Sophie Whitmore stood up crying harder, saying I wanted to steal him and make her look foolish in front of everyone. Then she said last week I had pushed her on the stairs, and she pulled back her sleeve to show a bruise. I stared at the bruise because I had never touched her, and the lie felt so large it stole my breath. My mother stepped between us and told me this was serious, as if my denial itself were proof of guilt. My father demanded to know how else Sophie Whitmore could have gotten that bruise if I had not done it. I said maybe she did it herself. and the words hung in the room like a match over dry paper. Sophie Whitmore's eyes widened with practiced horror, and fresh tears spilled exactly when they needed to be seen. I shouted that she had been lying about me for years, and that this was just another lie built to hurt me. My father stepped toward me and asked if I had really been bullying my sister all this time in secret. I begged them to listen. I begged them to let me explain. But my father slammed his fist against the mantel. He said he had heard enough of my excuses, though I had not been allowed to finish a single sentence. My mother said quietly that she thought they had raised me better than this, and that hurt almost worse. I looked at Sophie Whitmore then, really looked. And for a second she stopped crying and stared back dry-eyed. I whispered that she was lying. She answered calmly that she was not, and that calmness scared me more than sobbing. I turned to my father and begged him to believe me, saying I would never hurt her or start cruel rumors. I said she was jealous because Ethan Walker liked me more than her, and I knew that sounded desperate. My father's face changed. He went cold and flat, and he said he did not want to hear another word from me. Then he called me sick. He said something was wrong with me and that I needed professional help immediately. I said I was not sick, but he pointed at the front door as thunder shook the windows behind him. I told him it was storming outside. He said he did not care and that where I went was not his problem. Then he said the words that carved themselves into me forever. Get out. I don't need a sick daughter here. I looked at Helen Whitmore, silently begging her to stop him, to say this was madness, to choose me once. She turned away from me and kept one protective arm around Sophie Whitmore, and that silence became her answer. My hands shook so hard I could barely grab my jacket from the hook or get the zipper closed properly. The front door slammed behind me, and through the glass, I saw Sophie Whitmore watching with a smile. The rain hit me like a wall, cold, furious, relentless, and within seconds my clothes were soaked through completely. I waited on the porch for a moment, thinking maybe my father would open the door and say he had overreacted. The door stayed shut. No one came. No one called my name. So I stepped off the porch and started walking. I had nowhere to go, no plan at all, only the need to move farther away from that house and those lies. My phone buzzed with a low battery warning. I tried calling Chloe Bennett, but she did not answer the phone. Then I called Mia Carter, but it went straight to voicemail, and the loneliness hit me harder than the rain. It was Friday night. Everyone else was home with family, dry and warm, while I walked alone through floodwater. Wind threw my hair into my face, and passing cars sprayed puddles across my legs as they rushed past me. I headed for the library first, hoping I could wait there until the storm weakened and think about what to do. But the library was closed, its windows dark and doors locked, and the bus station was still 2 miles away. I decided if I could make it to the station, I could sit inside, stay warm, and survive the night somehow. Every step felt heavier than the last. Water squelched in my shoes, and my jacket clung to my skin like ice. Thunder cracked overhead. Lightning split the sky. I thought briefly about turning back and begging to be let inside, but I could still see the disgust on Daniel Whitmore's face, and I could still hear the words, sick daughter. I started wondering if maybe he was right, because why else would my own family choose her over me every time? The bus station was still a mile away when the rain got even heavier and the wind began to howl. I came to an intersection. I am still sure the light was green, but the storm blurred everything around me. I did not see the headlights until the car was almost on top of me, bright and blinding through the rain. A horn screamed. Brakes shrieked. I tried to jump back, but my body was too cold, too slow, too exhausted. The impact threw me sideways. I hit the hood first, then the pavement, and my head cracked hard on asphalt. Pain exploded through my skull, white hot and all-consuming, while rain poured into my eyes, mouth, and open lungs. I could not move. I could not breathe right. The world tilted sideways, and every sound came from very far away. I heard a car door slam and footsteps splashing toward me through the water, fast and panicked and close. A woman's voice kept saying, "Oh my God," as gentle hands touched my shoulder and told me not to move. She said she was calling 911. She told me to stay with her and asked my name while rain ran down her face. I tried to answer. Her features were blurry, dark hair, urgent eyes, and something strangely familiar in her expression. She asked for my parents' number so she could call them, and I coughed blood into the rain before answering. I whispered that they did not want me. I told her they had kicked me out and called me sick. Her face changed instantly. Shock, horror, recognition, and her voice trembled when she promised I would be okay. Sirens grew louder in the distance. Her face was the last thing I saw before the darkness closed completely. I do not remember the ambulance ride or arriving at the hospital. My first clear memory was sound, not sight. Machines beeped nearby. Fluorescent lights hummed above me. The smell of antiseptic settled in the back of my throat. Then I heard the same woman from the road speaking in a different voice. Steady now. Clinical. Unmistakably trained. She was telling someone I had a severe concussion and possible internal bleeding and needed close observation. When a nurse asked if she was family, the woman said she was the one who had hit me and she was staying. Time passed strangely. I drifted in and out of sleep while voices moved around me like currents underwater. Then I heard my parents arrive, introducing themselves as Claire Whitmore's mother and father at the hospital desk. The woman from the accident answered them coldly this time and introduced herself as Dr. Vivian Hart. I heard my mother recognize the name immediately because Dr. Vivian Hart was Dean of Graduate Studies at the university. My father tried to smooth everything over by saying it had been an accident and that they did not blame her. But Dr. Vivian Hart did not let him steer the moment. She asked why a 15-year-old was outside alone in that storm. Silence answered first. Then Daniel Whitmore muttered something about a discipline issue and a family problem. Dr. Vivian Hart repeated the words slowly, as if forcing him to hear how terrible they sounded in a hospital room. She asked what kind of discipline issue involved putting a child out into a storm at night during a weather emergency. My father said it was not like that, but he could not explain it in a way that sounded any better. Then Dr. Vivian Hart said I had told her my parents did not want me and had called me sick. Sophie Whitmore tried to say I was making it up and that I had barely been conscious on the roadside. Dr. Vivian Hart shut that down immediately. She said I had been coherent enough and she believed what I told her. I heard footsteps shift away from my bed, and then Dr. Vivian Hart said she needed a social worker right away. My father tried to sound authoritative. He said it was a private family matter and they would handle things from there. Dr. Vivian Hart answered that the moment they sent a minor into a storm, it stopped being private. Her footsteps came back to my bedside, and then I felt her warm hand rest over mine protectively. She said she was not leaving until she knew I was safe, and for the first time in years, I almost believed it. Then a police officer entered and began asking my parents why their 15-year-old daughter had been outside at 11 p.m. My mother insisted they had done nothing wrong, but her voice shook, thin and uncertain, beneath the fluorescent lights. The officer said he needed to understand why I had not been home during a major storm if nothing was wrong. I forced my eyes open for a second and saw shapes. My father, my mother, Sophie Whitmore, and Dr. Vivian Hart. Dr. Vivian Hart noticed I was waking and immediately ordered everyone except medical staff to leave the room. My father protested that I was his daughter, but Dr. Vivian Hart said she was the doctor in that room. The voices faded, the door closed, and the room became quieter, softer, and less frightening than it had been. Dr. Vivian Hart leaned close and whispered that I was safe now, and I wanted more than anything to believe her. Safe felt like a foreign language then. I had not felt it at home, and I did not know how to trust it yet. I closed my eyes again and let darkness take me, because it hurt less than staying awake inside all that truth. When I fully woke 3 days later, my parents were gone, but Dr. Vivian Hart was still there beside my bed. She had kept her promise. She had not left me alone, not once, and that fact settled somewhere deep inside me. I stayed in the hospital for 4 days with a severe concussion, while Dr. Vivian Hart visited every single day. She brought books, talked to me about science, college, and futures I had never allowed myself to picture before. My parents visited only once. They brought clothes and schoolwork and stood stiffly at the foot of my bed. Helen Whitmore said they were glad I was okay. Daniel Whitmore said I had given them quite a scare. Neither of them said sorry. Neither explained anything. Neither asked whether I wanted to come back home with them. Sophie Whitmore did not come at all, and the absence was almost easier than whatever performance she might have given. On the 5th day, a social worker named Rita Lawson came into my room with kind eyes and a quiet voice. She asked about my home, my family, and the night of the storm. And I told her everything from the start. I told Rita Lawson about the lies, the blame, the stolen opportunities, the bruises, and the words sick daughter. She listened carefully and took notes without interrupting, and I realized I was being heard instead of managed. Then Rita Lawson said I had options and did not have to return to that house if I did not want to. I asked where else I could possibly go because I had no relatives I trusted and nowhere stable to land. At that moment, Dr. Vivian Hart stepped into the room and said I could stay with her if I wanted. I stared at her in disbelief. She explained it could be a temporary foster placement while we figured things out. Dr. Vivian Hart had already started the paperwork, as if she had known I might need a real way out. I asked why she would do that for someone she barely knew, and my voice cracked halfway through the question. She sat on the edge of my bed and told me that someone had once done the same thing for her. When she was 17, her own family had thrown her out, and a teacher had taken her in and changed her life. Then Dr. Vivian Hart touched my hand and told me I was brilliant and full of potential that should not be wasted. She said no one had the right to tell me I was sick or let anyone dim the light inside me. I cried then, helplessly, because someone finally saw me as worth protecting instead of worth sacrificing. Dr. Vivian Hart said she would understand if I still chose to go home, but if I wanted different, she was there. I made my decision in that hospital room. I chose different. I chose safety, truth, and a chance to begin again. 6 months later, I felt like a different person living under Dr. Vivian Hart's quiet, orderly roof. Her house was full of books, plants, soft music, and the kind of calm I had only imagined existed for other people. She gave me the guest room and told me I could decorate it however I wanted, as if my preferences mattered. I transferred schools and started fresh where nobody knew about the storm, the lies, or being called a sick daughter. There, I was just Claire Whitmore. Smart, focused, and finally allowed to breathe without fear in my own room. Dr. Vivian Hart insisted I call her Vivian at home, though respect still filled every syllable of her name. She took me to lectures, research events, and dinners where professors discussed policy, equity, and real social change. She taught me that education is freedom and knowledge is power, and that no one can take either if you hold on. I threw myself into school with a hunger that was no longer about perfection, but about rebuilding who I was. Straight A's stopped being decorations no one cared about. They became proof that I had never been broken. Dr. Vivian Hart taught me about scholarships, grants, systems of support, and doors hidden inside institutions. She told me I would do something important one day. And for the first time, I believed the future might include me. Sometimes I wondered whether my parents ever learned the truth, or whether Sophie Whitmore confessed anything at all. Mostly, though, I did not think about them. I was too busy building something better than what I lost. Through old classmates, I heard Sophie Whitmore was still the golden child, still adored, still at the center of things. I also heard my parents had taken down every photo of me in the house, as if I had never existed there. Good, I thought then. Let them erase the girl they failed. I would become someone they could not understand anymore. By senior year, I knew what I wanted: education policy, systems change, and support for students failed by family. I wanted to turn pain into purpose and make sure kids like me were not swallowed by silence and bad luck. College was full of long nights, study groups, hard questions, and the slow return of trust in other people. I won a full scholarship to a prestigious university, backed by a glowing recommendation from Dr. Vivian Hart. I majored in education policy and social justice, and minored in psychology to understand how people and systems fail. During summers, I interned at nonprofits, youth advocacy groups, and organizations that turned empathy into practical action. I learned how funding moved, how programs were built, and how one opportunity could keep a student alive and enrolled. I graduated summa cum laude, and Dr. Vivian Hart cried at the ceremony with pride shining across her whole face. Soon after, I was hired as a research coordinator in the university's education department. Different building, same mission. At 25, I had an idea for a scholarship program focused on students from unstable, abusive, or abandoning families. I called it the Second Chances Scholarship because it was plain, honest, and impossible to misunderstand. Dr. Vivian Hart helped me write the grant proposals, revise the language, and sharpen every argument until it held. We secured support from 3 organizations and launched the program at one university as a pilot initiative. Then it spread to 2 universities, then 5, as more students applied and more partners saw the need. By the time I was 27, we had awarded more than $200,000 and helped 47 students stay in school. We also helped some of them stay alive, because survival and education are not separate when your home is unsafe. Local papers began noticing. Education journals called. Conference invitations arrived, each one opening another larger door. In interviews, I told my story vaguely. The 15-year-old girl told she did not belong and found a second chance. I never named my parents. I never named Sophie Whitmore. My story did not need revenge to carry weight. One day, my colleague Adrian Brooks knocked on my office door with unusual excitement in his voice. He told me I was being considered as keynote speaker for a graduation ceremony at Riverside State University. My stomach dropped the moment he said the school's name, because that was where Sophie Whitmore was graduating. Adrian Brooks blinked when I said quietly that my sister studied there, and then he asked if I wanted to decline. I looked at the applications stacked on my desk and thought about 47 students already helped by second chances. Then I asked what the ceremony theme was, and Adrian Brooks said, resilience and educational equity. He added that President Raymond Walsh personally wanted me because my work embodied exactly what they wanted to honor. I asked if I would have full creative control over the speech, and Adrian Brooks said yes, without hesitation. I thought about my parents sitting proudly in the audience, still convinced they had made the right choice years ago. I imagined Sophie Whitmore in cap and gown, performing gratitude in public while my name stayed buried in the past. I did not want revenge. I wanted closure. I wanted truth spoken calmly where lies once sounded stronger than me. That night over dinner, I told Dr. Vivian Hart everything about the invitation and why it shook me. I said they had no idea I existed in this role, no idea I had built something from what they broke. Dr. Vivian Hart set down her fork and asked the only question that really mattered. What did I want to happen? I said I wanted to close that chapter with truth, not anger, and show who I became despite everything. I told her that being honest about my story was not vindictive. It was simply refusing to stay erased. Dr. Vivian Hart squeezed my hand and told me to do it on my own terms, with my head held high. The next morning, I called Adrian Brooks and told him to inform President Raymond Walsh that I accepted. I did not see Sophie Whitmore in person before graduation, but social media made sure ghosts stayed visible. She posted filtered photos of brunches, study sessions, and proud captions about the perfect college experience. One post thanked our parents for supporting her every step of the way, and I stared at it for a long time. There was no mention of me anywhere. Not in photos, not in captions, not in comments, not in memory. In her online world, she was an only child with a flawless past and parents who had done everything right. Another photo showed Sophie Whitmore at dinner with Daniel Whitmore and Helen Whitmore, all of them smiling. The caption called them the two best people in the world and said she loved them for celebrating her graduation. My father looked older, gray at the temples. My mother looked tired, but all three looked proud and untroubled. I closed the app and let the screen go dark, because some lies look cleaner in photographs than in truth. Through old acquaintances, I heard Sophie Whitmore was excited for the ceremony and the party afterward. Someone in a group chat said the keynote speaker was some scholarship founder and would probably be inspiring. Sophie Whitmore complained that she hoped the speech would not be boring, and I almost laughed at the irony. I wondered if she would recognize me after 13 years, or if time had transformed me beyond her expectations. I wrote my speech over 2 weeks, drafting, trimming, rewriting, and reading it aloud to Dr. Vivian Hart. She advised me not to name names. Tell the story, she said, and let people connect the dots for themselves. So the speech opened with statistics about educational inequity and students who fall through invisible cracks. Then it shifted toward the personal, toward a girl told she was broken and too damaged to keep. I practiced in the mirror until my voice stayed calm, composed, and professional no matter what memory rose up. No tears, no rage, no performance. Just facts, truth, and the quiet strength that comes after surviving a storm. Adrian Brooks handled the logistics, parking, credentials, backstage access, and my name printed in the official program. The night before the ceremony, sleep would not come. I lay awake thinking about my father's voice in the porch. I asked myself whether I was doing this for the right reasons, or simply reopening a wound that had barely scarred. Dr. Vivian Hart came in with tea, sat at the edge of my bed, and asked if I had second thoughts. I told her they were not second thoughts, only thoughts. And she reminded me who I was now, not who they made me. She said I was not the girl they threw away. I was the woman who rebuilt herself into something powerful. I asked if she would be there in the audience, and she smiled and said, "Front row, always." Morning came too quickly. I dressed in a navy suit and wore Dr. Vivian Hart's pearl necklace for courage. In the mirror, I looked nothing like the soaked 15-year-old who had been told she was sick and unwanted. The campus looked beautiful. Old brick, trimmed lawns, graduates everywhere, and families taking photos in bright sunlight. The air buzzed with celebration and possibility, and I arrived early to meet President Raymond Walsh in his office. He welcomed me warmly and called my work extraordinary, saying the students would be inspired by what I had built. Then Adrian Brooks walked me backstage where faculty fixed robes and graduates peeked through curtains at the crowd. I looked down at the printed program and found the name I knew would be there. Sophie Whitmore, row 3. My heart kicked hard against my ribs, but I folded the program and told Adrian Brooks I was ready. A little later, Dr. Vivian Hart arrived in a beautiful emerald dress and hugged me with quiet certainty. She reminded me once more, head high, truth clear, no revenge, only honesty. And then she found her seat. The auditorium kept filling with families, graduates, staff, and all the people who expected a normal, happy ceremony. Somewhere in that crowd sat Daniel Whitmore and Helen Whitmore, waiting proudly for Sophie Whitmore's name. They had no idea who the keynote speaker really was, because most people never read the small print carefully. From the wings, I could see the stage lights, the podium, and a sea of faces beyond the edge of the curtain. Then I want to pause and ask you something. Have you ever proved your family wrong after they doubted you? If you have, leave a yes or no in the comments. And if this story is reaching you, hit like for me. Now back to the ceremony, because what happened next changed everything and ended 13 years of silence at once. President Raymond Walsh stepped to the podium and welcomed graduates, families, faculty, and honored guests. He spoke about achievement, resilience, and the limitless potential of students who keep going despite hard circumstances. Then he introduced the keynote speaker as the director of the Second Chances Scholarship Program, Ms. Claire Whitmore. Polite applause filled the auditorium as I stepped into the light and crossed the stage with slow, measured steps. Then I saw Sophie Whitmore in row 3, clapping and smiling until she looked up and recognized my face. Her hands froze mid-applause. Confusion flashed first, then recognition, then shock so sharp it drained all color from her. Behind her, further back, my parents were still clapping politely because they had not really registered me yet. I reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked across the room while Sophie Whitmore stared like a ghost. Dr. Vivian Hart sat front row to the right of the stage and gave me one small nod of encouragement. I thanked President Raymond Walsh for the introduction, and my voice carried cleanly across the silent auditorium. That was when Daniel Whitmore leaned forward sharply, trying to place the voice he had not heard in 13 years. Helen Whitmore's hand flew to her chest before she even fully recognized my face, as if memory arrived first. I said it was an honor to be there and that I wanted to speak about resilience after losing everything. Then I told them about a 15-year-old girl who was told she did not belong and was too broken to keep. My mother gripped my father's arm. From the stage, I could see the exact second truth began landing in their bodies. I said that one night, in the middle of a storm, that girl was thrown out and told she was not wanted. Uneasy whispers moved through the audience. The room shifted under the weight of a story that felt too specific to be fiction. I said she wandered alone for hours, with no money, no safety, and no place to go before a car hit her. Sophie Whitmore had gone completely still by then, her face pale and fixed as students around her started noticing. Then I said someone stopped, someone helped, and someone saw potential where other people had only seen trouble. I turned and gestured toward Dr. Vivian Hart, telling the room she became my family in every way that mattered. I paused and let the silence settle before saying the 15-year-old girl in that story was me. The auditorium went dead silent. You could feel the shock move like a wave from the stage to the back wall. My father half stood before my mother pulled him down again, both of them staring at me with open mouths. Around Sophie Whitmore, her classmates whispered to each other, confused and suddenly hungry to understand what was happening. I said I was standing there because Dr. Vivian Hart refused to give up on me when my own family had. I said she taught me that rejection is not the end of a life. Sometimes it is the beginning of one. Then I explained that the Second Chances Scholarship came from that experience and exists for students cast aside at home. I looked directly at Sophie Whitmore and said, "Being rejected does not define you. What you do afterward does." My voice stayed calm as I spoke about the 47 students our program had already helped stay in school and alive. Someone in the back whispered loudly, asking whether that was really my family sitting there in the audience. I continued without flinching. Professional, steady, and certain, I said family is not always biology, but often choice. I said sometimes family is the person who chooses you when others walk away and leaves the light on. Dr. Vivian Hart wiped at her eyes, smiling through tears, and I felt stronger just seeing her there. I told the graduates that you do not need everyone to believe in you. Sometimes one person is enough to save you. I said success is not about proving cruel people wrong. It is about building something meaningful despite what they did. By then, Helen Whitmore was crying openly, mascara running, while Daniel Whitmore's hands trembled in his lap. Sophie Whitmore looked down with shaking shoulders as her friends stared at her and quietly connected the missing pieces. I ended by telling the graduating class their worth is not decided by who stays, but by how they grow after loss. I said rejection, disappointment, and underestimation are guaranteed in life, but what happens next is still your choice. Then I stepped back from the podium, and the standing ovation began slowly before spreading across most of the room. Not everyone stood. My father stayed seated with his face in his hands. My mother clapped weakly through tears. Sophie Whitmore did not move at all. She sat frozen in her chair, staring down at her own lap. President Raymond Walsh thanked me and called the speech powerful, and then the ceremony moved on to the diplomas. Backstage, I watched through the curtain gap as students crossed the stage while the audience kept whispering about my speech. When Sophie Whitmore's name was called, she walked up with a stiff smile and visibly shaking hands. The applause for her was thin and uneven, with some clapping out of habit and others simply watching in silence. After the final names, caps flew, cheers rose, and families rushed forward, but I slipped out through a side door. In the reception area outside, Dr. Vivian Hart hugged me tightly and asked how I felt after all of it. I thought about it honestly and answered with one word: free, because that was exactly what my chest felt like. Then Adrian Brooks appeared, still stunned, and told me my parents were at the side entrance asking to see me. I asked if I had to speak with them, and he said absolutely not. Security could handle it if I wanted, but I straightened my shoulders and said I would speak to them on my terms for exactly 5 minutes. Dr. Vivian Hart squeezed my hand and promised she would stay right there with me, no matter what was said. I walked toward the side entrance and found Daniel Whitmore, Helen Whitmore, and Sophie Whitmore waiting by a pillar. My father looked gray and much older than I remembered. My mother's makeup was smeared. My sister hovered behind them. I stopped 3 feet away, keeping a professional distance, and asked calmly whether they wanted to talk. My father stammered that they had not known I would be there, and I answered that I was sure they had not. My mother said I looked well, and I told her I was well because Dr. Vivian Hart made sure of that. My father said they owed me an apology, and I answered that they owed me much more than just that. Helen Whitmore called it a terrible mistake and said they should have listened, her voice cracking under the weight. I said they should have protected me, because that is what parents are meant to do when a child is under attack. I reminded them they chose Sophie Whitmore's lie over my truth and called me sick before throwing me out. Sophie. Whitmore flinched as tears rolled down her face, while my father admitted he had been wrong. He said he had regretted that night every day for 13 years, and I answered simply, "Good," without raising my voice. My mother reached toward me and asked if we could talk privately as a family and try to fix this. I told her gently but clearly that we were not a family anymore because they had ended that 13 years earlier. My father insisted they could fix it, but I said there was nothing left to repair between us now. Then Sophie Whitmore spoke, small and broken, saying she was sorry and had been only 12 and stupid. I told her she had been old enough to know what she was doing and old enough to keep lying for 13 years. Right then, Adrian Brooks approached with scholarship files that President Raymond Walsh wanted me to have before I left. The folder showed official documents, student photos, recipient stories, and my title printed clearly beside the program name. My father stared at it and asked if I had really built all of that, and I answered yes, despite everything. My mother opened the folder and saw the numbers. Over $200,000 granted, and dozens of students already supported. She looked up in disbelief and asked if I was truly a director, and I said senior director as of last month. Then President Raymond Walsh himself walked over, smiling, still unaware of the history and pain standing in that hallway. He praised my keynote and turned to my parents, asking if they were Claire Whitmore's family and must be proud. Silence followed for one sharp second before Dr. Vivian Hart answered smoothly that yes, of course they were proud. My father forced out the words, but when he looked at me, I could see he was finally seeing who I had become. He admitted they had no idea. I answered softly that they never asked, because they erased me and moved on. My mother whispered that she had tried to find me after the hospital, and I told her I changed my name legally. I said I needed them not to find me because distance was part of healing from what they had done. Then some of Sophie Whitmore's friends approached, confused and uncomfortable after hearing the speech and hallway whispers. One girl touched Sophie Whitmore's arm and asked if I was really her sister, because she had always said no. Another reminded her that last year she told people her sister had died in a car accident when she was 12. I raised my eyebrows and repeated the lie back to her. She told people I was dead. And the shame hit hard. Sophie Whitmore flushed and muttered that saying I was dead had been easier than explaining what really happened. Her friends demanded to know what was easier about hiding that her family had thrown her sister away. One of them looked at me and apologized sincerely for what had happened, and I thanked her quietly. Then the friends walked away from Sophie Whitmore, leaving her standing there alone with the damage finally visible. My mother started to speak to her, but Sophie Whitmore cut her off sharply and turned back toward me. She said she had wanted to tell the truth many times, but had been too afraid that everyone would hate her. I asked what exactly she had been afraid of. Truth itself, or finally living with consequences instead of hiding behind tears. She said everyone was right to hate her, and that she deserved what was happening now to her life and reputation. I stepped a little closer and told Sophie Whitmore I did not hate her, because hate would keep me tied to her. I said I forgave her for my own peace, not for hers, but I did not want a relationship going forward. She tried to ask whether we could just start over, and I stopped her with a firm, final no. I told her she had 13 years to correct the lie, yet chose to keep me erased, and that revealed who she became. Sophie Whitmore sobbed openly then, and Helen Whitmore pulled her close the way she once had on the couch. I looked at Dr. Vivian Hart and asked if we could go home now because I had said all I needed to say. She linked her arm with mine and answered yes, and together we turned and walked away without looking back. Behind us, I heard my father call my name weakly and my sister cry harder, but I kept walking anyway. I want to pause again here because that moment, watching Sophie Whitmore lose the power of lies, took 13 years. If you have ever had to set boundaries with toxic relatives, leave a comment because boundaries truly matter. And if this story has stayed with you so far, please subscribe because someone else may need to hear it too. Now let me tell you what happened in the weeks after graduation, because the truth kept moving long after the speech. The week after the ceremony, my phone would not stop buzzing with calls, voicemails, and desperate messages from home. My father begged me to call back. My mother sent long emails full of apology, stress, and thin excuses. They wrote that Sophie Whitmore had been going through a phase and that they did not understand what they were doing. I did not answer them. Not then. Work kept me busy, and the scholarship program demanded more of my energy. Meanwhile, the speech started going viral because someone had recorded it and posted clips online after the ceremony. 50,000 views became 100,000, then more, and comments poured in from strangers around the country. Some wrote that I was incredible. Others said family is not blood, but whoever shows up when you are hurting. A few asked if the story was real, what university it happened at, and what became of the sister afterward. I ignored most of that noise and focused on work, because the students mattered more than internet curiosity ever would. But I still heard things. Group chats leaked. Old acquaintances talked. Sophie Whitmore's social world was collapsing fast. Some of her friends called the lie about me being dead deeply disturbing and said they no longer trusted her at all. Another person uninvited her from a wedding, saying they wanted no drama and no one built on deception. Part of me felt a flicker of sadness for her, but the larger part felt only relief and distance. Dr. Vivian Hart and I had dinner one night, and she asked gently how I was really processing everything. I searched for the right word and finally said I felt free, like I had put down something heavy I forgot I carried. She said I had handled the confrontation with grace and then asked whether I wanted reconciliation with my parents. I thought carefully before answering no, because forgiveness and renewed access are not the same thing at all. Dr. Vivian Hart nodded and reminded me I was allowed to walk away, even from people linked to me by blood. 2 weeks later, my assistant buzzed my office to say a man named Daniel Whitmore was waiting downstairs. I closed my laptop, straightened the papers on my desk, and told her to send him in after 5 minutes. When my father entered, he looked 10 years older. Gray hair, slumped shoulders, red eyes, and defeated posture. He thanked me for seeing him, and I told him I had a meeting in 20 minutes, making the boundary plain. He sat across from me like it was a job interview, and said he needed to tell me something clearly. He admitted they had been wrong, that he had been wrong, and that what he did and said was unforgivable. I answered yes, it was, and the office stayed quiet long enough for the truth to settle between us. Then he said Sophie Whitmore had finally confessed everything the week before. All the lies, all the manipulation, all of it. I told him it was 13 years too late, because some truths cannot arrive late and still heal what they shattered. My father said he knew it changed nothing, but that he needed me to understand how guilt had haunted them daily. He talked about my empty room, the missing photos, and the realization that they had destroyed something irretrievable. I told him trust was the real issue, and trust had not merely cracked, it had been shattered beyond repair. He said he understood, but I answered that he could never understand being 15 and homeless in a storm. I told him he would never know what it is like to hear your own father call you too broken to love. Tears rolled down his face then, and he asked what he could do now. Anything at all, to make amends. I answered that there was nothing he could do, because some doors are closed by the people who slam them first. 3 days later, an email arrived from Sophie Whitmore with the subject line, "I'm sorry," and I nearly deleted it. Instead, curiosity won, and I opened it to find a confession stripped of excuses and soaked in late regret. She wrote that she had always been jealous of me, my grades, my calm, and how easily people respected me. She said attention never felt like enough for her, and hurting me had become the easiest way to get more. She admitted she knew our parents would believe her because they always had, and that certainty made the lie easier. She claimed she never thought Daniel Whitmore would actually throw me out, though she admitted she watched it happen. She wrote that when she saw me walk into the storm, she felt sick but was too scared and too proud to stop it. Then she confessed to lying for 13 years, telling others I had died because death sounded cleaner than cruelty. She said she had destroyed my life, but also her own, because now no one trusted her and she had no real friends. She even wrote that a job offer had been lost after someone from graduation told human resources about the family truth. She did not ask for forgiveness in that message. She only begged me to know she was deeply sorry at last. I read the email twice, saved it in a folder, and chose not to respond. Not because I had no words, but because silence was a boundary. 4 days later, she emailed again, then again, each message sounding more desperate and more stripped of pride than the last. After the 5th email, I sent one short reply telling Sophie Whitmore I forgave her for my own peace, not for reunion. I wrote that she had 13 years to correct the lie and instead kept me erased, so I wanted no further contact. She stopped emailing after that, and for the first time, I believed she might finally hear a no and accept it. My speech kept spreading online, and a local news station reached out asking to interview me about the scholarship program. I agreed on one condition, that the focus stay on the students and the system, not on my family drama or pain. The segment aired under a headline about a local researcher helping students in crisis through second chances. 3 scholarship recipients were interviewed, and one young woman said our program had literally saved her life. After that, applications tripled, funding requests poured in, and 3 more universities asked to become partners. Education journals invited me to write about the model, the methods, and what real support for vulnerable students requires. A national conference asked me to speak about equity and education, and even the state board sent recognition. One day, Adrian Brooks leaned in my office doorway and joked that I was becoming famous whether I liked it or not. I told him I only wanted to help some kids. He answered that I was doing more than that. I was changing systems. Through all of it, Sophie Whitmore's social media went quiet, then private, as if retreat could erase consequences. My father sent one final email saying they were proud of me even if they had no right to say it. I did not reply. My mother called once and left no voicemail, and I let that silence stand between us. Old family friends reached out awkwardly on LinkedIn after hearing about my work and wanting to reconnect. I declined politely because politeness and access are not the same thing, and I had learned that the hard way. Then Dr. Vivian Hart was invited to give a keynote at a national conference in Chicago and asked me to come. We flew there together as colleagues and family, stayed in a nice hotel, and presented work we truly believed in. Over dinner, Dr. Vivian Hart told me I had built a good life and should be proud of what I created. I told her it was because of her, but she shook her head and said she only gave me the chance. She said I did the rest, the labor, the healing, the courage, and the decision not to stay defined by harm. 1 year after Sophie Whitmore's graduation, my life looked entirely different from anything that Storm had promised. The Second Chances Scholarship had expanded to 10 universities and helped 83 students stay in school and hopeful. I had been promoted to senior director, given a corner office, and recognized by people I once only read about. I even dated a kind man named Marcus Hale, who worked in public policy and treated me with steady respect. The relationship did not last, but it ended gently, teaching me that not every ending has to wound you. When Dr. Vivian Hart turned 60, we threw her a party filled with colleagues, students, and chosen family. During the toast, I thanked the woman who taught me that family is not born by blood, but built through love. She cried happy tears, and the room around us felt like proof that healing can become something larger than survival. I still thought about my biological family sometimes, but not often, and no longer with the pain they once triggered. Mostly, I wondered in passing whether Sophie Whitmore ever got help, and whether my father still drafted emails to me. One Christmas, a card arrived signed by Daniel Whitmore, Helen Whitmore, and Sophie Whitmore with no message inside. I put it in a drawer. I did not throw it away, but I did not answer either. It simply existed. Later, I spoke at another graduation and told the students that boundaries are not walls, but doors you control. Afterward, a 20-year-old woman approached me in tears and said my story sounded painfully like her own. She told me her family had thrown her out at 16, and that she thought she was entirely alone in that experience. I told her she was not alone, and that surviving what should have destroyed you is already a form of greatness. She hugged me tightly, and I drove home afterward to the house I shared with Dr. Vivian Hart, my real mother. That evening, I felt complete peace, the kind I once thought belonged only to other people with gentler beginnings. People sometimes ask whether I regret the storm, the pain, the hospital, and the chain of events that followed. I do not, because that terrible night led me to this life, this work, and this family I consciously chose. I know not every story turns out like mine, and I know I was lucky that Dr. Vivian Hart found me. Not everyone gets rescued by the right person at the exact worst moment of their life. I understand that deeply, but everyone does get to set boundaries. Everyone gets to decide who has access to them and who does not. You do not owe toxic people your presence, not even when they are related to you, and especially when they are. Forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. You can forgive someone and still keep them out of your life forever. Those things are not contradictions. Sometimes they are both necessary if you want peace without losing yourself again. I learned that blood alone does not make a family. Choice does. Consistency does. Showing up every day does. Dr. Vivian Hart showed up for me for 13 years straight, and that is why she earned the name Mom. My biological parents showed up once, failed me, and then let silence do the rest. That told me everything. I also learned that success is not about proving cruel people wrong. It is about building something healing despite them. The scholarship program was never revenge. It was purpose, and purpose always reaches farther than revenge ever can. Revenge tries to wound. Purpose tries to heal, and healing creates futures bigger than the damage that started them. Your worth is never determined by who stays beside you. It is shaped by who you become after others leave. Some people will call you too broken, too much, too sick, or not enough because they cannot see past themselves. That limitation belongs to them, not to you. You still get to choose what happens next in your own life. I chose to become someone who helps children and students who need another chance to keep going. That is my legacy, not the family that threw me away, but the family, work, and hope I built afterward. So yes, that storm almost destroyed me, but it also became the moment that redirected my entire future toward meaning. I am 28 now, older and steadier, and I feel whole in ways that frightened 15-year-old could never imagine. My parents' names still exist in my phone, but only as part of my past, not my present or future. Sophie Whitmore still sends a short apology every few months, small messages saying she is thinking of me. I read them and do not answer. Maybe one day I will. Maybe I never will. Either choice is acceptable. Dr. Vivian Hart is simply Mom now, the emergency contact on every form, and the first person I call with good news. Blood did not make her my mother. Choice did. Love did. And 13 years of showing up when I needed it did. Every year on October 15th, I drive past my old house, not to punish myself, but to remember the girl who survived there. I park across the street, look at the windows and door, and remind myself that she endured more than anyone knew. She survived being called sick, being thrown away, and being told she was too broken to deserve love. More than that, she did not just survive. She built a life, helped others, and transformed pain into something useful. If you are in a storm right now, whether literal or emotional, please remember that surviving it is possible. Thriving after it is possible too, even if the people who should have protected you were the ones who failed. Just because someone gives up on you does not mean you must give up on yourself. Never hand them that power. Set your boundaries. Choose your family. Build your purpose slowly, stubbornly, and without apologizing for needing peace. And never let anyone tell you that you are too sick, too broken, too much, or not enough to be loved. You are enough exactly as you are, and your future can still become beautiful even after a night like mine. Thank you for listening to my story and staying with me all the way to the end of this long road. If this story helped you in any way, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who may need it too. I have linked similar stories below for anyone who wants more. But most of all, remember that your worth is yours. No family, no lie, no cruel word, and no storm gets to define you forever unless you let it. Take care of yourself, protect your peace, and keep walking toward the life that chooses you back.